Have you ever trusted someone so completely that you never imagined the world could turn against them? What would you do if everyone believed you were guilty, but only you knew the truth? Before we continue, make sure you hit the like button, subscribe to the channel, and share this story with someone who loves emotional mystery dramas. Your support helps us bring you more unforgettable stories every week. Emma Carter had worked as an emergency room nurse for almost 9 years. She was not famous. She was not rich. Most people outside the hospital had never heard her name. But inside Riverside Medical Center, everyone knew exactly who she was. Patients remembered her because she never rushed them. Doctors respected her because she noticed small details others often missed. New nurses looked up to her because she never laughed at mistakes. Instead, she taught people how to avoid making the same mistake twice. For Emma, nursing had never been just another job. It was a promise she made to herself years ago after losing her younger brother, because doctors discovered his illness too late. Every shift reminded her why that promise mattered. That Thursday night looked completely ordinary. Rain tapped gently against the emergency room windows. Ambulances arrived one after another. Monitors beeped across every hallway. Doctors hurried from room to room while nurses checked medications and comforted frightened families. Nothing seemed unusual. At least not yet. Emma was treating a 68-year-old retired schoolteacher named Harold Mason. He had arrived complaining about severe chest pain. A young resident physician increased one of Harold's medications. Emma immediately looked at the monitor. His blood pressure dropped. "Stop the medication," she said calmly. The resident looked surprised. "The pain hasn't improved." Emma pointed toward the monitor. "But his blood pressure is falling too fast." Harold looked at both of them. "Am I having a heart attack?" Emma smiled gently. "We're going to make sure that doesn't happen." She reduced the medication and asked another nurse to contact the attending physician. The resident looked embarrassed. After the physician reviewed the numbers, she agreed with Emma's decision. The medication adjustment had prevented Harold from becoming much worse. The resident quietly thanked her. Emma simply nodded. "No one remembers who was right," she said. "They only remember whether the patient survived." That was the kind of nurse she was. She cared more about results than recognition. Only minutes later another emergency arrived. A little girl needed medication before surgery. A nervous new nurse named Olivia entered the child's weight incorrectly into the computer. The calculated dose became much higher than it should have been. Fortunately, the medication scanner sounded an alarm. Olivia froze. "I almost gave her the wrong amount." Emma placed a hand on her shoulder. "But you didn't." "I could have. And now you'll never forget to double-check." Instead of reporting Olivia immediately, Emma stayed beside her while she recalculated everything correctly. The child received the proper medication. Another disaster had quietly been avoided. No aplausos. No celebración. Just another normal night. Around 2 o'clock in the morning everything changed. The charge nurse, Linda Brooks, answered a phone call. Emma noticed something strange. Linda's face remained calm, but her hands stopped moving. She listened without speaking. When the call ended, she immediately ordered 3 trauma rooms to be cleared. Every available staff member looked confused. "What's happening?" one nurse asked. Linda answered carefully. "We're receiving a government patient." No one asked another question. Government patients occasionally arrived under police protection. But something about Linda's expression suggested this situation was different. Very different. A few minutes later black SUVs stopped outside the emergency entrance. Not police vehicles. Not ambulances. Dark vehicles with heavily tinted windows. Men and women wearing plain clothes stepped out. Their movements were organized. Professional. Purposeful. Within seconds hospital security opened every restricted entrance. The strangers entered carrying identification badges. Federal investigators. Conversation throughout the emergency department almost disappeared. Patients noticed. Families noticed. Even doctors slowed down to watch. One investigator walked directly toward Emma. He introduced himself. "My name is Special Agent Daniel Brooks." His voice remained calm. "I need to ask you a few questions." Emma looked around. Can it wait until my patient is stable? I'm afraid it can't. He escorted her into a small consultation room. Instead of beginning with accusations, he asked ordinary questions. How long have you worked here? Almost 9 years. Were you previously in the military? Yes. What was your position? I served as a combat medic. For how long? 6 years. The questions continued. Everything still felt routine. Until he opened a thin folder. He slid several printed pages across the table. Hospital access logs. Electronic security records. One line had been highlighted. Emma stared at it. According to the report, her identification badge had opened a restricted laboratory inside the hospital several nights earlier. She frowned. I've never entered that room. The system says otherwise. Then the system is wrong. Agent Brooks folded his hands. Minutes after your badge entered that laboratory, classified government medical files were downloaded. Emma looked directly into his eyes. I know nothing about that. He remained expressionless. The records indicate your badge was used. My badge never left my uniform. Can anyone confirm that? Every nurse working with me. He wrote something in his notebook. Do you still possess military security clearance? No. Were you ever involved with classified medical research? Emma paused. Years ago she had signed agreements preventing her from discussing certain military assignments. I can't answer that. His eyes narrowed slightly. You can't. I legally can't. Silence filled the room. Outside they could hear stretchers rolling across the hallway. Monitors continued beeping. Life inside the emergency department continued. Inside the consultation room everything felt frozen. Finally Agent Brooks closed the folder. We'll need your hospital identification badge. I'm still working. Not anymore. My patients. Other nurses will care for them. Emma slowly removed her badge. Before handing it over she said quietly, please tell Dr. Miller not to increase Mr. Mason's medication again unless his blood pressure improves. Agent Brooks accepted the badge. You still care about your patient? I always will. She stood and walked out. Staff members watched her. Some looked confused. Others looked frightened. Several whispered among themselves. Rumors spread through hospitals faster than almost anything else. Within minutes people were quietly asking the same question. What had Emma done? She returned to the staff lounge hoping for a few minutes alone. Instead she found a message on her phone from an unknown number. Don't trust the evidence. Someone planned this weeks ago. Emma stared at the screen. Her heart beat faster. She typed back immediately. Who are you? No reply. She tried again. How do you know? This time another message appeared. Because you were never the real target. Before she could answer, the hospital's operations director entered the lounge. Richard Collins. He rarely visited the emergency department during night shifts. Tonight he looked unusually serious. 2 security officers stood behind him. Emma, he said quietly, the hospital has placed you on immediate administrative leave. She blinked. Already. The investigation is serious. You haven't even asked for my side. The board acted quickly. Emma looked at the security officers. So you've already decided. Richard avoided eye contact. We're protecting the hospital. Emma nodded slowly. No. She picked up her backpack. You're protecting your reputation. Without another word, she walked toward the employee lockers. Several co-workers silently watched her leave. Some looked sympathetic. Others avoided looking at her completely. Olivia hurried after her. I don't believe any of this. Emma smiled. You don't have to convince me. But everyone else. They'll believe whatever makes sense until the truth catches up. Olivia's eyes filled with tears. Will you come back? Emma septiapek. I honestly don't know. Just then the entire building began shaking. A deep thunderous sound echoed across the hospital. Everyone rushed toward the windows. Military helicopters appeared through the rain. One. Then another. Then another. They landed on the upper parking structure. Military vehicles blocked every entrance to the hospital. Soldiers quickly surrounded the emergency department. Doctors stared in disbelief. The military physician hesitated. No. The surgical team remains under military command. The chief surgeon looked shocked. This is my operating room. And this is our patient. Before anyone could argue further, the patient suddenly began convulsing. His heart monitor screamed. One medic shouted, "Pressure dropping." Another yelled, "We're losing him." Several surgeons rushed toward the stretcher. The military physician stopped them. "Nobody touch him." Everyone froze. Emma watched from across the hallway. Something about the equipment looked strangely familiar. Not identical, but close enough to trigger an old memory. Years earlier, she had trained beside experimental emergency equipment during one of her classified military assignments. She hadn't seen anything similar since leaving the service. One young military medic looked completely overwhelmed. "I've never seen this reaction." The senior physician shook his head. "Neither have I." Another alarm sounded. The patient's heartbeat became dangerously irregular. Emma could hear every tone from where she stood. She quietly whispered to herself, "His blood pressure is falling too fast." One of the medics increased a medication. Emma immediately shook her head. No. The numbers dropped even lower. She couldn't stay silent anymore. She stepped closer. "Stop increasing the medication." Every soldier instantly looked toward her. The military physician frowned. "Who are you?" "Emma Carter. I'm an emergency nurse. We're handling this." "I know, but your medication is making him worse." The physician stared at her. "You've been observing from 30 feet away?" "I've been listening." "You can hear the monitor pattern?" "Yes." Several medics exchanged confused looks. The physician folded his arms. "What would you do differently?" Emma pointed toward the portable monitor. "Raise his pressure gradually. Not all at once." The physician looked unconvinced. "Why?" "Because his body isn't responding normally. If you force it higher too quickly, his heart won't tolerate it." Before anyone answered, another officer hurried toward them. "Colonel." "The patient's rhythm is collapsing." The physician looked back at Emma. "You've seen something like this before?" Emma hesitated. "I can't discuss previous assignments." He studied her face. Then he noticed something on her personnel file that one of the investigators still carried. Former military medic. Combat décoration. Advanced trauma certification. He slowly lowered his voice. "Can you help us?" Emma glanced toward Agent Brooks. The investigator crossed his arms. "She's currently under investigation." The colonel answered without taking his eyes off Emma. "My patient doesn't care about investigations. He cares about surviving." The words silenced everyone. Agent Brooks looked uncomfortable. Emma spoke quietly. "If I enter that operating room, your investigation becomes much more complicated." The colonel nodded. "If you don't, my patient may die." For several long seconds nobody moved. Finally Agent Brooks sighed. "I'm not stopping you." Emma immediately grabbed a pair of gloves. The military team rushed toward operating room 3. Inside, controlled chaos filled every corner. Machines beeped continuously. Blood covered several surgical towels. Doctors worked as quickly as possible. Emma moved beside the anesthesiologist. She studied every monitor, every number, every rhythm. Within seconds she noticed something unusual. "Stop." The room became silent. The lead surgeon looked up. "What now?" Emma pointed toward one monitor. "The pressure isn't your biggest problem." "What do you mean?" "His heart isn't failing. It's protecting itself." Nobody understood. Emma continued. "Your medication is triggering the wrong response." The anesthesiologist looked confused. "That's impossible." "Emma Kamliri. No. It's uncommon." She adjusted one infusion by the smallest amount. "Increase this slowly." The surgeon looked doubtful. "We're wasting time." Emma didn't argue. She simply watched the monitor. One number changed. Then another. The patient's heartbeat slowly became more regular. Oxygen levels improved. Blood pressure climbed little by little. The alarms finally became quieter. Nobody in the room spoke. The chief surgeon stared at the monitor. I've never seen that happen. Emma quietly answered, neither had I. Until years ago. The colonel looked directly at her. Where? Emma remained silent. She had already said too much. The surgery continued. Nearly 40 minutes passed. The bleeding was finally controlled. The patient's heartbeat stabilized. One by one, exhausted doctors stepped back. The chief surgeon removed his gloves. I honestly thought we were going to lose him. The colonel turned toward Emma. You saved his life. Emma shook her head. No, we all did. Just then the operating room doors opened. Agent Brooks entered holding a tablet. His expression looked completely different than before. He walked straight toward Emma. I need to speak with you. Now. Immediately. The colonel frowned. Can it wait? I'm afraid not. They stepped into the hallway. Agent Brooks looked at Emma for several seconds before speaking. The evidence against you doesn't make sense anymore. Emma folded her arms. It never did. Our cyber specialists found inconsistencies. What kind? The security records were manipulated. Emma wasn't surprised. I told you. He nodded. I know. The hospital access logs were created after the fact. So someone used my identity. Yes. Agent Brooks took a deep breath. I owe you an apology. Emma looked into his eyes. Apologies don't erase damage. No. They don't. Before either of them could continue, Emma's phone vibrated. Unknown number. She opened the message. The person who framed you is still inside the hospital. Don't let them leave. Emma immediately looked around. Doctors. Visitors. Patients. Administrators. Security officers. Hundreds of people filled the corridors. Any one of them could be responsible. She typed back. Who is it? A reply appeared almost instantly. Follow the hospital director. He isn't acting alone. Emma's heartbeat quickened. At the far end of the hallway, she saw Richard Collins quietly speaking with someone near a restricted elevator. When he noticed Emma looking toward him, he abruptly ended the conversation. Then he walked away much faster than before. Emma watched him disappear around the corner. Something inside her told her this wasn't coincidence. Whatever secret had brought soldiers, federal investigators, and a critically injured military patient to Riverside Medical Center. Richard Collins somehow knew far more than he had admitted. Just before Emma could follow him, the lights across the entire hospital flickered once, then twice. Then, everything went completely dark. Emergency alarms echoed through the building. Patients screamed. Machines switched to battery power. Someone shouted from the hallway. The backup generators aren't working. Emma slowly looked toward the dark corridor ahead. Deep inside, she knew one thing with absolute certainty. This blackout had not happened by accident. Complete darkness swallowed the hallway. For a brief second, the entire hospital became silent. Then panic exploded from every direction. Patients called for help. Children started crying. Doctors shouted instructions. Battery-powered monitors filled the darkness with sharp warning beeps. The emergency generators should have started within seconds. They didn't. Emma grabbed a small flashlight from the emergency cabinet beside the operating room. The narrow beam cut through the darkness. This isn't a normal power failure, she said. Colonel Mason immediately understood. Someone disabled the backup system. Agent Brooks pulled out his radio. No signal. The colonel checked his own military communicator. Mine is dead too. Emma looked toward the intensive care room where the military patient had just been transferred. We have to get back. They hurried through the dark hallway. Hospital staff were trying to calm frightened patients while manually checking oxygen supplies. Several nurses recognized Emma. What happened? Is this an attack? Emma answered honestly. I don't know yet. But stay with your patients. Don't leave your department. The intensive care unit was illuminated only by emergency battery lights. The patient was still alive. Barely. His oxygen level had started falling again. Dr. Harris looked relieved when Emma entered. The monitoring system keeps shutting down. Emma immediately checked every connection. The machines aren't failing. They're being interrupted. Agent Brooks frowned. Remotely. Emma nodded. Someone inside the hospital knows exactly what they're doing. Before anyone could respond, a loud crash echoed somewhere down the corridor. Everyone turned. Another crash followed. Much closer. Colonel Mason drew his sidearm. Stay behind me. A security guard came running toward them. His breathing was heavy. The west entrance. They forced it open. Ooh, I couldn't see. The lights were already out. Another nurse hurried over. The pharmacy computers just restarted. Emma looked confused. But the generators are still offline. Exactly. Only certain systems had power. Whoever controlled the outage was choosing what remained active. Emma suddenly remembered the anonymous text. The person who framed you is still inside the hospital. She quickly looked toward the administrative offices. Most were completely dark. Except one. A faint blue glow came from a single office window. Someone was using a computer. Emma quietly pointed. There. Agent Brooks followed her flashlight. I see it. Richard Collins' office. The operations director. Colonel Mason motioned to two soldiers. Come with us. They quietly approached the office. The door was slightly open. Inside. Richard Collins sat alone. Multiple computer screens glowed in front of him. His fingers moved rapidly across the keyboard. He hadn't noticed anyone behind him. Emma could clearly see encrypted files transferring across the screen. Progress. 82% complete. Agent Brooks whispered, That's our stolen data. Richard suddenly froze. One of the monitors reflected Emma's flashlight. He slowly turned around. For just a second. Their eyes met. Then Richard slammed one key on the keyboard. Every monitor instantly went black. Move, shouted Brooks. Richard pushed his chair backward and sprinted toward a side exit. The soldiers chased him. Emma followed. The chase moved through empty administrative hallways. Richard knew the hospital perfectly. He ignored the main corridors and headed toward maintenance passages. He planned this route, Emma said while running. Brooks nodded. He knows exactly where we're going. Richard burst through a heavy steel door leading into the underground service tunnels. The lights were still out. Only emergency exit signs provided enough illumination to continue. Colonel Mason spoke into his radio. Block every basement exit. Static answered him. No communications. Richard disappeared around another corner. Emma noticed something lying on the floor. A black access card. She picked it up. Hospital infrastructure authorization. Level 5. The highest clearance available. This explains everything, she whispered. Brooks looked at the card. He could access every security system. And every generator. And every camera. Richard's footsteps echoed ahead. They rounded another corner. Dead end. Richard stood beside a large electrical control panel. He wasn't trying to escape anymore. He looked strangely calm. You've already lost, he said. Brooks raised his weapon. Step away from the controls. Richard smiled. You still think this was about stealing files? Emma's heart sank. What do you mean? He looked directly at her. You've been asking the wrong question all night. Emma remained silent. Richard continued. The files were only a distraction. Colonel Mason narrowed his eyes. Then what was the real objective? Richard slowly laughed. The patient. Everyone froze. The attack wasn't supposed to happen on the highway. It was supposed to happen here. Emma immediately understood. You wanted him to die inside this hospital. Richard nodded. And everyone would have blamed the nurse already under federal investigation. Brooks stared at him. You framed Emma. To cover an assassination. Richard smiled again. Exactly. Emma took one step forward. Who are you working for? His smile disappeared. You'll never meet them. Suddenly, he pressed a hidden switch beneath the control panel. The hallway shook violently. A loud explosion echoed somewhere above them. Dust filled the air. Hospital alarms immediately activated. The oxygen system. Emma shouted. Dr. Harris's voice came over a nearby emergency speaker. We have a fire on the third floor. Richard used the confusion to run again. Colonel Mason chased after him. Brooks followed. Emma stopped. She looked toward the ceiling. Smoke was already drifting into the tunnel. Patients. Children. People connected to life support machines. The hospital needed her. She made her choice. I'm going back. Brooks looked over his shoulder. We need you here. Emma shook her head. No. You need to catch him. They need to survive. Without waiting for permission, she ran back toward the emergency department. Smoke had begun filling several hallways. Automatic fire doors closed throughout the building. Nurses struggled to move patients without elevators. One elderly man remained trapped inside his room because his bed couldn't fit through the doorway alone. Emma immediately rushed inside. Two young nurses looked terrified. We can't move him. Emma examined the bed. Take the mattress. What? Leave the frame. Within seconds they transferred the patient onto the mattress itself, using bedsheets as handles. They pulled him safely into the hallway. One crisis solved. Another appeared instantly. A mother screamed for help. Her little boy had become separated during the evacuation. Emma followed the woman's description. Blue pajamas. Red blanket. Around 6 years old. She searched every nearby corridor. Finally, she heard quiet crying inside the hospital chapel. The little boy sat alone beneath a wooden bench. Emma knelt beside him. Your mom's looking everywhere for you. The child wiped away his tears. I was scared. I know. But you're not alone anymore. She carried him back to his mother. The woman hugged her son while crying with relief. Thank you. Emma smiled. Take him outside now. Firefighters had finally arrived. The flames were quickly brought under control. Fortunately, the explosion had damaged equipment instead of patient rooms. No lives had been lost. Nearly an hour later, power slowly returned throughout the hospital. Emergency lights switched off. Computers restarted. Air conditioning began working again. Everyone looked exhausted. Colonel Mason finally returned. His uniform was covered in dust. Brooks walked beside him. Emma immediately asked, Did you catch Richard? Brooks remained silent.
Colonel Mason en Sword.
No. He escaped through an old maintenance tunnel connected to the parking garage. Emma lowered her head. So he's gone. For now. Just then, Brooks' phone vibrated. He read the message twice. His face changed. What is it? Emma asked. He slowly looked up. We identified the owner of the organization behind Richard Collins. Colonel Mason crossed his arms. Ooh. Brooks took a deep breath. It isn't a private company. It isn't a foreign government. Emma waited. Brooks quietly finished the sentence. It's someone from inside our own Defense Department. The hallway became completely silent. Even Colonel Mason looked shocked. Emma suddenly realized everything that had happened tonight. The false accusations, the stolen files, the assassination attempt, the hospital blackout, the explosion, none of it had been planned by outsiders. Someone powerful, someone with government authority, had been controlling everything from the very beginning. Nobody spoke for several seconds. The hallway was filled with doctors, firefighters, military officers, and exhausted nurses, yet it felt completely silent. Emma looked at Agent Brooks. Are you absolutely certain? He slowly nodded. The evidence came directly from secure defense records. Colonel Mason took the tablet from Brooks and carefully reviewed every page. His expression became darker with each passing second. Finally, he looked up. This reaches much higher than we expected. Emma folded her arms. Then Richard Collins was never the leader. No. He was only carrying out orders. Brooks pointed toward one photograph displayed on the screen. A senior defense official. Decorated. Respected. Frequently interviewed on television. His name was General Victor Langford. Emma recognized him immediately. Years earlier she had briefly seen him during a military medical conference. At the time, he had spoken about protecting soldiers and advancing battlefield medicine. Now his photograph appeared at the center of an espionage investigation. Emma whispered, I never imagined.
Colonel Mason interruptait gently.
Neither did we. Just then another military officer hurried into the hallway. Sir, we found Richard's abandoned vehicle. Anything inside? Nothing. He planned his escape perfectly. Brooks sighed. He knew we'd eventually discover the truth. Emma looked toward the operating room where the injured military scientist was recovering. If Richard escaped, doesn't that mean General Langford already knows we failed to blame me? Brooks froze. She was right. The entire operation had depended on Emma becoming the perfect suspect. Now that plan had completely collapsed. Which meant their enemies would almost certainly try something else. Colonel Mason immediately understood. We have to move our patient. Dr. Harris looked surprised. He's still too weak. We don't have another choice. Within minutes, another secure military transport arrived behind the hospital. This time the security was even stronger. Armored vehicles surrounded the loading entrance. Military helicopters circled overhead. Every possible escape route was covered. Emma helped prepare the patient for transfer. As she adjusted one of the 4 lines, the man slowly opened his eyes. His voice was weak. You never gave up. Emma smiled. Nurses usually don't. He looked at her carefully. They'll come after you. I know. I'm sorry. You have nothing to apologize for. He reached into the pocket of his hospital gown with trembling fingers. From inside he removed a small metal coin. It carried the insignia of his military research unit. I've carried this for 20 years. I want you to have it. Emma hesitated. I can't accept this. You already have. He gently placed it into her hand. You reminded me why good people still wear uniforms. Before Emma could answer, the medical team carefully moved him toward the waiting transport vehicle. The convoy disappeared into the early morning rain. For the first time in hours, the hospital finally felt quiet. Only tired faces remained. Doctors returned to their patients. Maintenance crews repaired damaged equipment. Families reunited with loved ones. Life slowly returned to normal. Or at least, it appeared to. 3 days later, Emma remained suspended from work. Although the investigation had cleared her completely, the hospital board still hadn't officially reinstated her. Some administrators worried the publicity would damage the hospital's reputation. Others feared becoming involved in a government investigation. Emma spent those days quietly waiting. She didn't call reporters. She didn't post on social media. She didn't defend herself publicly. She simply waited for the truth. On the 4th morning, something unexpected happened. Hospital employees gathered outside the main entrance after hearing several military vehicles approaching. Emma happened to be standing near the reception desk. She looked outside. A long black limousine stopped in front of the hospital. Behind it came several military SUVs. The doors opened. General Victor Langford wasn't inside. Instead, another man stepped out. Older, calm, wearing 4 stars on his uniform. General Robert Whitmore, one of the highest-ranking officers in the country. Everyone immediately stood still. Hospital administrators rushed forward. Richard Collins' replacement greeted him nervously. General, welcome. General Whitmore ignored everyone. Instead, he walked directly toward Emma. Every employee watched. Some even stopped breathing. The general stopped less than 2 feet away. For several seconds, he simply looked at her. Then, without saying a single word, he raised his right hand and gave her a perfect military salute. The entire hospital froze. Doctors stared. Nurses covered their mouths. Federal agents stood silently. Emma instinctively returned the salute. Only after lowering his hand did the general finally speak. Staff Sergeant Emma Carter. On behalf of the United States Army, I owe you an apology. No camera flashes. No speeches. No applause. Only complete silence. He continued. You honored your oath. We failed to honor ours. Emma quietly answered. I only did my job. The general smiled slightly. Exactly. And that's why you're standing here today. He turned toward the hospital board members. I've personally reviewed the investigation. Every accusation against Nurse Carter was fabricated. Every disciplinary action taken against her is to be removed immediately. He paused before adding, furthermore, the Department of Defense officially recognizes Nurse Emma Carter for extraordinary courage under extreme circumstances. One soldier stepped forward carrying a small presentation case. Inside rested a military civilian service medal. The general placed it around Emma's neck himself. Hospital employees finally began applauding. Not because someone told them to, but because they genuinely wanted to. Olivia wiped tears from her eyes. Dr. Harris smiled proudly. Even Agent Brooks quietly clapped from the back of the crowd. The general looked at Emma one final time. You saved more than one life. You protected something much bigger. Emma looked down at the medal, then back at the people surrounding her. I wasn't alone. She pointed toward the nurses beside her. The people standing here save lives every single day. They don't wear medals. They wear scrubs. Silence returned once more. This time, it wasn't uncomfortable. It was respectful. Months later, Riverside Medical Center officially reopened the emergency department after completing extensive security upgrades. Emma returned to the exact same trauma room where everything had begun. The walls had been repainted. New equipment had been installed. But one thing hadn't changed. Patients still arrived frightened. Families still waited nervously. Lives still depended on ordinary people making extraordinary decisions. One afternoon, a brand new nursing student nervously approached Emma. I've heard your story. Emma smiled. Don't believe everything you hear. The student laughed. Were you really given a military medal? Emma looked down at the small coin still hanging beside her identification badge. Then she smiled again. The medal isn't the important part. What is? Emma gently adjusted the young nurse's stethoscope. The important part is this. Never let fear make your decisions. Never let titles intimidate you. And never stop doing what's right. Even if you're the only person left who believes you're right. The student nodded. I'll remember that. Emma walked back toward her patient. Another ordinary shift had begun. Another life needed help. And that was exactly where she belonged.